In a terror massacre overseas, that's the latest word from Istanbul. Investigators today found new clues as they search for a cold-blooded killer who ISIS claims is one of its own. Donald Trump knows more about hacking than you do, and that's what the president-elect says about the hack attacks. The Obama administration is blaming squarely Russia. But today, Trump's incoming press secretary facing some questions.
Was Russia behind it, yes or no?
His response, plus the debate inside the intel community, and later, Mariah's meltdown.
That was amazing.
Was it really? The singer's team says she was sabotaged by a New Year's plot. We'll get Kennedy's take, so that should be a rollicking good time. It's time to fire up the Fox News deck. Hello, I'm Greg Jarrett in for Shep. Happy New Year. We begin with President-elect Donald Trump saying he's still not sure that Russian hackers actually interfered with our U.S. election. The president-elect is set to meet this week with leaders of the intel community. He also questioned the White House decision to punish Russia for those attacks. Now, the Obama administration last week announced it was kicking out 35 Russian diplomats, closing Russian compounds in Maryland and New York, and the diplomats left yesterday. President Obama said in a statement that all Americans should be alarmed by Russia's actions, but his successor, well, he's still skeptical after the announcement. The president-elect said it was time to move on, and he praised Russian President Vladimir Putin for not retaliating right away. President-elect Trump said he wants intelligence officials to be absolutely certain about the hacking because he says it's hard to prove. He also says he knows things about this specific situation that you don't and other people don't, and he'll tell us more about it sometime this week, allegedly. Today's incoming press secretary tried to clarify what those things may be.
The president-elect is referring to is that he gets briefed on a daily basis on different threats and issues facing this nation by his national security team and by other members of the intelligence community. So he is privy to information that nobody else is. But what I think what he is driving at is the fact that there doesn't seem to be conclusive evidence within the intelligence community. There are people who believe certain things, but what we're waiting for is this final report to whether or not it is actually conclusive or whether or not there's just general belief that that's the direction they think this thing is in.
Translation, we may not learn from Mr. Trump later this week as to what he meant by he knows things that you don't. He also said the Obama administration punished Russia for political reasons because Hillary Clinton lost the election. That's Sean Spicer. We also have Team Fox coverage. Peter Ducey at Trump Tower here in Manhattan. But first, Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge in Washington. Catherine, what are intel officials saying about this?
Well, thanks, Greg. An intelligence source told Fox News that there is more information beyond what was released last week, and there's a healthy debate over whether more intelligence should be declassified and made public in the final report to the president. But there is real concern in the intelligence community over exposing sources and methods, as well as collection by foreign governments who work with the U.S. government. Meantime, the hackers' intent and motivation were not fully addressed in last week's release, and proving who was behind the operation really is an even higher threshold to cross. Meantime, the House Intelligence Committee senior Democrat said Sunday the evidence is there and is undeniable.
How solid is the evidence that it was the Russians?
It's very solid. It's indeed overwhelming. And the president-elect, as you know, also said that he knows things that other people don't know. He needs to stop talking this way. If he's going to have any credibility as president, he needs to stop talking this way. He needs to stop denigrating the intelligence community.
For some context, the Russian government really has a history of denying major events, and in one case, forced the U.S. government to declassify highly sensitive signals intelligence to make its case to the public, Greg.
You know, Catherine, Trump's team also seemed to brush off a report from the FBI and Homeland Security Department. Tell us about that.
Well, on Fox and Friends this morning, the future White House press secretary urged caution on the issue.
It's not a question of what I believe, Ed. It's a question of what happened. And I think there's an intelligence report that's due out later this week.
And with the expulsion of those Russian diplomats who left Washington over the weekend, a senior Republican on foreign policy told Fox News Sunday the Russians won't stop until they know the consequences are real.
What Vladimir Putin needs is a sense of new boundaries. He's had a free reign throughout the world over the last 8 years. He needs to have a sense of boundaries and to know that costs are going to be imposed if he crosses those boundaries. The administration has not drawn those boundaries and they have not imposed those costs.
The final report, which was requested by the president, should be released to the public in a declassified form, or at least portions of it, sometime in the next 2 weeks. We think about 10 days from now, that last week before the inauguration.
All right. Catherine Herridge in Washington. Catherine, thanks.
You're welcome.
Team Fox coverage continues now. Peter Doocy live at Trump Tower here in New York City. Peter, are transition officials saying anything more about why Mr. Trump seems skeptical that the Russians interfered?
They are, Greg. This morning, transition officials were echoing what their boss, the president-elect, said over the long holiday weekend, that they just think it's hard to tell who hacks what.
There's a lot of, probing is the actual word when you go out and try to go to various sites. Whether or not they were hacked and they did anything is a completely different story. The way the mainstream media is playing this up is that they had an influence in the election. There is zero evidence that they actually influenced the election.
And the president-elect also explained over the weekend that he is skeptical. One of the reasons he's skeptical of what U.S. intelligence officials are telling him about Russian involvement with election interference is because he remembers U.S. intelligence officials being wrong about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Greg.
Peter, is the president-elect back at Trump Tower there today?
He is, and he'll be joined a little later on by the Vice President-elect Mike Pence. In the lobby a few minutes ago, reporters saw the Treasury Secretary nominee Steven Mnuchin in there, but otherwise it's a pretty slow day. So it seems like the president-elect has spent some of it looking at crime statistics, because he tweeted this: Chicago murder rate is record-setting, 4,331 shooting victims with 762 murders in 2016. If mayor can't do it, he must ask for federal help. Remember, Chicago's Mayor Rahm Emanuel did come by here a few weeks ago for what was described as a cordial enough meeting where he drew on his experience as the first Obama chief of staff to help Trump officials chart out a game plan for January. Now the president-elect is telling Mayor Emanuel to come on back and ask for help.
Yeah,
right?
Well, Chicago certainly needs something because the murder rate there is just horrific. Peter Doocy, live at Trump Tower. Peter, thanks. This is one of the few issues where President Obama and most Republicans in Congress say they agree. Russia is not our friend. So how is this going to work if the incoming president continues to praise Vladimir Putin? Our next guest says there's a lot that Congress can do to push back against the president-elect. We'll break down the opinions live from a gloomy. More now on Donald Trump's response to hacking during the election, while our sitting president says Russia is a national security threat. Our next president says he's not so sure. Let's bring in Annalee Gooden, who is managing editor of Real Clear Politics. All right, quite a contrast between the two. And is Mr. Trump simply trying to engage Russia in a new and better relationship, or is there something else, maybe a bit more nefarious? A lot of stories out there that he's beholden to Putin and Russia by virtue of his business ties.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we've seen some mixed messages from Donald Trump on this, because he has shown he gets upset. He doesn't like being told or hearing that he won the election because of Russian interference or possible hacking. But then he goes out of his way to praise Putin and to praise the United States to have a better relationship with them. And so that's a question the president-elect needs to answer. And hopefully we'll hear that from him, as he said he would talk about this more later this week.
Well, he says he knows a lot about hacking. In fact, I'll quote, "I know things other people don't know."
Right.
It kind of seems reminiscent of that boast when Trump said, "Oh, I know more about ISIS than the generals do." So was this latest remark simply an off-the-cuff boast, or does he really and genuinely feel that this whole Russian hacking thing impugns the integrity of his election?
Yeah, and I think that's something we have to wait and see, because we have seen from Donald Trump a tendency to tweet first and then give a more thoughtful answer later. And I'm thinking back to how when President Obama said he could have beat Trump in the election, that Trump tweeted immediately that he couldn't believe the president said that. It showed the transition wasn't going well. But later when he was asked about it, and after he spoke to President Obama, he said, oh no, things are going great, the transition's going great. So as he gets more intelligence briefings, which they said he's getting this week, maybe we'll see a different point of view from him. You know, Russia's gone from foe to friend. It might be a foe again. We seem to be a little all over the place here.
Yeah. You know, President Obama waited till the very end of his term to do anything about the Russian hacking, and even Democrats are calling it weak and insufficient. Does that give President Trump room to maneuver with the Russians for a better relationship?
Absolutely. And I think the fact that you haven't really seen a response from Putin was a smart move on his part, because he knows there's 18 days left. There's a new leader coming in. He just has to sit and wait it out. And so that was a smart move by him, because he's seen these indications from Donald Trump that Trump is open to a more open, better relationship between the two countries. So this might be a little bit too late on the part of President Obama.
Yeah. What does this mean for Rex Tillerson, who is Mr. Trump's nominee to be the next Secretary of State, and who, of course, has close ties to Putin and to Russians? Will this make his confirmation hearing even more serious and contentious?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right on that, because he's going to go possibly before the Senate Armed Services Committee, which is led by Senator John McCain, who's quite the hawk on Russia and who has said that President Obama hasn't gone far enough. And Senator McCain plans to hold hearings this week on the hacking. So I think you'll see tough questions, not just from the Democrats, but from Republicans of this nominee, asking him what he's going to do and questioning his company's ties to Russia.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, you know, Trump continues to not release his tax returns, which would shed light, likely, on his business ties, not only to Russian businesses, but perhaps to the Russian government as well. Could be a cause of concern. But you would admit that Trump is out of sync with most Republicans who do blame the Russians for the hacking, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen, like I said, Senator John McCain, Senator Lindsey Graham has questioned this. These are two Republicans who are very respected on foreign policy issues and very intelligent on these issues. Even Speaker Ryan said Russia needs to be punished over this. I mean, you also have to realize these Republicans are also thinking we don't want the RNC hacked next.
Right.
So.
Well, in the absence of Trump's cooperation, could Republicans somehow retaliate against the Russians?
Oh, that's a good question, and that's a hard one to answer, because while Congress does have power, they have limited power. I mean, don't underestimate the power of the congressional subpoena. When Trump and his staff are in office, they can subpoena whoever they want to Capitol Hill to question them before hearings.
Right.
But really, their biggest weapon is going to be making a fuss in the media.
Surely. Emily Gooden, managing editor of RealClearPolitics.com. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
The Islamic State is claiming responsibility for an attack that injured at least one American. A gunman apparently on the run after killing almost 40 people at a nightclub New Year's Eve. We'll get the latest on the manhunt, and we'll hear from the American who took a bullet but made it out alive. Next. We still don't know if any Americans died in Istanbul when a gunman suddenly opened fire in a crowded nightclub as people rang in the new year. But officials say most of the victims were not from Turkey. A manhunt is underway for the attacker who killed dozens of people and injured many more. The Turkish deputy prime minister says they have the gunman's fingerprints and they're close to identifying him. Take a look at this video inside the club just 1 hour before the attack. Revelers there. The Islamic State claiming responsibility for the massacre today. Police say they have taken in 8 people for questioning about the attack. We now also have surveillance video from the deadly night in Istanbul. You can see people ducking for cover as the gunman walks up to the club. He fires a shot from off camera. It appears to ricochet off a railing. Here's another angle from across the street. He shoots at a car and the bullet bounces off. This is inside the club, the killer walking around, bodies on the floor all around him. NBC's Today Show spoke with an American who survived the attack. He said he tried not to flinch as a bullet ripped through his leg so the gunman wouldn't shoot him again. No word on whether any other Americans were hurt. Benjamin Hall has the latest. Benjamin?
Hi, Greg. Well, yes, tonight Istanbul remains on its highest alert, and that's because the gunman is still at large. There's a massive manhunt going on at the moment, but they still don't know his identity, although, as you say, they do have his fingerprints. ISIS also earlier today released a statement saying that the attack had been carried out by a soldier of theirs. They also said that it was retaliation for Turkish airstrikes in Syria, and that the Istanbul club had been chosen because it's where, quote, Christians were celebrating their pagan feast. More details have been emerging. The gunman, who fired up to 180 bullets and threw grenades, stopped to swap out magazines 5 times. He then waited for 13 minutes inside the kitchen and changed clothes before leaving in a taxi amid the chaos. Now, experts looking at some of the video footage say he was clearly well trained and that he had his exit route already scoped out. Greg?
Benjamin, do we know anything more about this attacker?
Not his identity yet. As you say, the fingerprints have been gotten by the authorities. However, they've also said they believe he's from the same ISIS cell that carried out an attack at the Istanbul airport last June, and that killed 41 people. As a result, Turkish officials believe that he may be from a Central Asian country such as Uzbekistan or Kyrgyzstan. Today, victims have also begun talking about the harrowing scene inside the club, including that American businessman, William Rock.
It's a massive tragedy. This is very unfortunate. I was with 9 people. 7 of us were shot. 7 of us were shot.
Today, the funerals of some of the dead began taking place as the identities of more victims were released. Among the 39 killed, 27 were foreigners, just seeing in the new year at the club popular with tourists. And today, President Obama also reached out to the Turkish people and offered his condolences, saying that the U.S. would be there to help Turkey in any way it can. Greg?
Benjamin Hall. Benjamin, thanks. North Korea's dictator says his country is about to launch its first test of a missile that could possibly reach the United States. Kim Jong-un announcing the test of an intercontinental ballistic missile, an ICBM, in his annual New Year's address, a claim he has never made before. He also warned the U.S. to stop meddling in Asia. In the announcement on government-run TV, Lil Kim appears with his wife and other leaders of the brutal regime. They bowed before what appears to be wax statues of Lil Kim's father and his grandfather, North Korea's founder. Lawmakers making their way back to Washington before Congress begins again tomorrow. Already, President Obama is using his final days in office trying to thwart the GOP's #1 priority. So can the president save Obamacare, or is it too late? That's next. President Obama heading to Capitol Hill this week to try to protect a key part of his legacy. The White House says he'll be meeting with House and Senate Democrats, Dems only, on Wednesday to talk about saving Obamacare. Republican leaders say repealing the Affordable Care Act is one of their top priorities when they get back work officially tomorrow. But President-elect Donald Trump says he might want to keep certain parts of the law. Mike Emanuel live in Washington with more. Hi, Mike.
Well, hi, Greg. Yeah, Democrats say keeping the popular parts, helping those with pre-existing conditions, and allowing those up to age 26 to stay on their parents' plan isn't possible without some of the less popular components. This afternoon, ahead of the upcoming meeting with President Obama, the top House Democrat issued this warning to Republicans.
The fact is, it's the old thing of going into a china shop. You break it, you own it. And they're dealing with something that is very, when I say complex, it's sophisticated.
And Democrats are warning about the risk of scrapping the health care law without a defined replacement, suggesting it would throw the health system into chaos. Greg?
Yeah, that from the person who said, we'll know what's in it when we pass it, or something like that. Any indication those warnings will get Republicans to think twice?
No, trying to scrap Obamacare has been a high priority since the law was passed by Democrats and signed into law by President Obama. President-elect Trump over the weekend talked about how premiums have skyrocketed for so many Americans. He noted it is part of Mr. Obama's legacy, but said this law is unaffordable and doesn't work. And the Senate's top Republicans signaled lawmakers will move quickly.
We will move right after the first of the year on an Obamacare replacement resolution. And then we will work expeditiously to come up with a better proposal than current law, because current law is simply unacceptable and not sustainable.
The heavier lift will be passing a replacement. There have been a variety of GOP ideas, and soon they'll have to pick one and go with it. Greg?
Mike Emanuel live in Washington. Mike, thanks very much. Let's bring in our panel now. Morgan Ortagus is a GOP strategist, former State Department press official, national co-chair of Maverick PAC. Julie Roginski joins us, Democratic strategist, Fox News contributor. Good to see you both.
Great to see you. Happy New Year.
Morgan, he was warned, President Obama was warned, don't pass this strictly along party lines because the pendulum always swings in politics. And if you don't have any Republican support for Obamacare, you're going to eventually lose it. It'll ruin your legacy. He refused to heed the warning. Is now you reap what you sow.
And he hasn't learned the lesson because he's going to Capitol Hill to meet only with Democrats, as you pointed out. So there's been a lot of decrying the partisanship in Washington over the past 8 years. But there's been partisanship since our nation's founding. What we've missed over the past 8 years is leadership, is people doing what Bill Clinton did in the mid and late 90s, where he left the White House, he went down to the Hill, he negotiated with Republicans. So whether it's been the executive orders that the President Obama has issued more than any president in history, or whether it's Obamacare, the Iran deal, you name it. He's done everything through a partisan lens. And now I think that's why you see all of the last-minute scrambling to try to save a legacy where he probably could have prevented it if he worked on the Hill, which, by the way, Democrats are the ones who actually got onto him the most for not working across the party line.
Is this an act of desperation on the part of President Obama? Because, I mean, through reconciliation, Republicans can get rid of most of it with just a simple majority vote, and they have the votes.
And they're welcome to do that, but then they have to explain. Mitch McConnell will have to explain to people in his home state of Kentucky, many of whom signed up for KYNet, which is a very successful exchange, why they're being tossed off their health care.
But if they phase it over 3 years...
Listen, they can do whatever they want, but the problem for them is, as Nancy Pelosi said, I don't always agree with her, but in this case she's right, it's the Colin Powell rule, right? You break it, you own it. Repeal it. And then do what? I suggest that they're going to repeal it and then delay the repeal because they will understand very quickly that the ramifications of this for their own constituents
Well, they'll buy time to craft together a replacement.
They've had time.
Which you will need 60 votes for. So
what does a replacement look like?
I don't think that President-elect Trump has actually said what it's going to be. As you said, he said that he's going to repeal it, which is easy to do through reconciliation, much harder to get the 60 votes. So this is where I think Trump can actually shine, because he's not beholden to either party. He's shown that he's willing to talk to CEOs about 1,000 jobs. So if he wants to be a successful president, which I think he can be, what he's going to need to do is he's going to have to go in and negotiate with Senate Democrats to get a new Obamacare, like whatever he wants to replace it with, on the table. But the key trick will be to get Republicans in the Freedom Caucus and the House and Senate to support him. So they're going to have to support whatever negotiations he makes with the Senate Democrats.
You know, you raise a very good point, because why did Democrats have to bail out Donald Trump and the Republicans who are about to throw their own constituents off the exchanges, right? I mean, Democrats have done their job. They passed the law. Republicans are repealing it, and now what Morgan is saying, is suggesting, is that Donald Trump is going to have to go to Chuck Schumer, hat in hand, and say, help us with your caucus, because my caucus won't be able to get this done.
Well, I
suggest to the Democrats, again, the Democrats did their job, Republicans rejected it. It's yours now, roll with it.
Let me move forward, because it's not just Obamacare and its repeal, but economic tax reform is also part of the Trump agenda on Capitol Hill. It's supposed to be a top priority. Lowering individual corporate tax as well as capital gains and dividend taxes. Can they do it, and how quickly?
We have not seen a president be successful at trying to negotiate across bipartisan lines since President Bush, quite frankly, tried to negotiate on Social Security and privatize it. So President-elect Trump is going to be doing something that Republican and Democrat presidents have not been successful at for the past, 10 to 12 years, which is negotiating a major package. Even when you look at sequestration, where you look at the spending and the tax spending cuts on the Hill, no one's been able to come to any sort of agreement. So you need someone to be a Teddy Roosevelt-like figure to stand above both parties and say, we're going to make a deal.
How about the compromise, as Trump has proposed? All right, Democrats, how about a $1 trillion infrastructure construction program, which they likely would like?
Well, it depends. The devil's in the details. Are you talking about government spending and infrastructure? Are you talking about tax breaks for existing projects?
He wants to rely on private financing, although that may be a stretch.
That may be a stretch. And the problem here, of course, again, are the Republicans, who have for years railed against infrastructure spending of any kind. And
yeah,
all
but
of a
Democrats
sudden,
love it.
Yes,
so you say infrastructure and they start salivating.
Well, it depends. Again, the devil's in the details. What he's proposing is not something the Democrats are salivating over. What I would love to see is Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, others who've been completely against any kind of infrastructure spending or stimulus package, now suddenly saying we want to do this because a Republican president wants to do it. It's business as usual in Washington.
Well, one thing
we've
learned is nothing is shovel ready, right? Okay. Morgan,
things,
Julie, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Happy New Year.
More immigrants tried to illegally come into the U.S. the past year compared to a year ago, according to the Department of Homeland Security. Officials say the feds picked up more than 500,000 immigrants from October 2015 through September of 16. The government reports it sent most of the immigrants back to their home countries. Adam Housley, live in our Los Angeles newsroom with more on that. Hi, Adam.
Hi, Greg. Yeah, we've seen this before back in 2014. I mean, surges have happened really over the last few decades. But in 2014, it's very similar to what's happening right now. This surge, according to DHS, specifically coming from 3 Central American countries, which is Honduras, Guatemala, and also El Salvador. They said those numbers have gone up significantly. In fact, the latest numbers they came out with were for fiscal year 2016, and they released those on Friday. Those numbers, according to the feds, show that the apprehensions across the country jumped by 67,000 compared to 2015 to 530,000, just over that at least, illegal immigrants, and sent nearly 451,000 back to their home countries. Again, that's over a 12-month period that ended in September. The majority of those apprehended came from those Central American countries. It included about 137,000 families, and the Border Patrol arrests alone were up nearly 23% this year, Greg. So as you can see, that spike that we saw a couple of years ago, in fact 3 years ago really, that we covered here at Fox pretty extensively, has now come back, at least in 2016, Greg.
And what do officials say is causing the increase, Adam?
Well, and that's where the debate comes down. And the administration and a lot of immigrants' rights groups will say that it's really a push, that there's a lot of crime and there's a lot of corruption and a lot of poverty in those 3 Central American countries, and it's basically forcing these people north. Now, on the other side, the Border Patrol says they talked to a lot of these migrants. They say that poverty's always been there, crime has always been there, and that this is more of a pull situation from the U.S. The report actually acknowledges that sanctuary cities have a bit of a play here because people are allowed to stay. And also, the Border Patrol says when they talk to a lot of these migrants, they say they're coming now because they know when President-elect Trump goes into office, if he follows through on some of his pledges about a border wall and much stricter policy on the border, it's going to be a lot tougher to cross. So really, it depends who you talk to, Greg. It might be a bit of all 3, but definitely there is some talk here that it has to do with the election of Donald Trump.
All right, we'll wait and see. Adam Housley in Los Angeles. Adam, thanks. Well, the man convicted of killing 9 people at a black church in South Carolina is going back to court with his own life on the line. Dylan Roof, acting as his own lawyer. He says he does not plan to put up much of a case to avoid the death penalty. But he is fighting to keep some evidence out of court. We'll talk to a lawyer who's worked as both prosecutor and a defense attorney. Dylan Roof will represent himself tomorrow as a jury decides if he should live or die. The self-proclaimed white supremacist shot and killed 9 people in a prayer group at a church in South Carolina, summer of 2015. Last month, a jury took less than 3 hours to convict him in the guilt phase. Roof is representing himself against the advice of his lawyers. He told a judge he won't call any witnesses, won't present any evidence in the hearings. Prosecutors, in the meantime, say they'll bring as many as 36 family members of the victims to the courtroom to go face-to-face with the killer. Let's bring in Keisha Heaven, defense attorney, former prosecutor. So if he does end up representing himself, and he has an absolute Sixth Amendment right to do so, he could, on cross-examination, confront the survivors as well as the family members of the people he murdered.
Right. And that won't be good before the jurors deciding whether he gets the death penalty.
That'll alienate the jury.
Absolutely. They'll have no sympathy for him whatsoever.
You know, right now, behind closed doors, the judge is holding a competency hearing. Now, you may recall before the guilt phase, he did the same thing, determined that Dylan Roof was competent to stand trial. Is the judge doing it all over again right before the penalty phase just to make sure that some fancy defense attorney in the future doesn't claim this is an appealable issue?
Yes, absolutely, because oftentimes on appeal, a defendant will claim that, you know what, I represented myself, but I really wasn't competent. The judge should have never allowed me, so therefore this needs to be remanded back to the trial level. And I believe that's what will happen in this case, so the judge is probably trying to protect himself.
Sociopaths and psychopaths often try to represent themselves in murder cases, and they use the opportunity to deliver an opening statement, a closing argument, and it's just a rant.
Right. And narcissists, which is usually combined with those mental disorders. I think that's what is going on here. And most times when you see someone doing this, they actually believe that they can better represent themselves than an attorney who went to law school and has experience as a litigator.
You know, there's some really strange things going on here. Apparently Dylann Roof is trying to get excluded certain evidence that he thinks would be embarrassing to his family. And then the judge said something rather dramatic today before he shut the doors and closed the hearings. The judge said, if you only knew what I know now.
Right. Well, the fact that he doesn't want any mental health or psychological evidence coming in shows that something's clearly wrong with him, because that's his only chance of not getting the death penalty. Why would he be concerned about embarrassing his family as opposed to being sentenced to death? So that shows right there he's making a big mistake.
Not calling any witnesses is a lost opportunity to try to gain some sympathy with the jury. I mean, you could call, for example, as they did in the Boston marathon bomber case, somebody who says, you know, it's a much more severe punishment to spend the rest of your life in the equivalent of a cage than it is a quick, painless death by lethal injection. Somebody who could take the witness stand, an expert, and say, this guy's really got mental problems. It's not insanity, but intellectual deficiencies.
Right, and what the jurors will hear here is only him. And that's going to be a problem where they already probably see him as this murderer, evil person, and now he's going to be the only witness. If he decides to say anything at the sentencing, he's leaving them with the whole notion that he deserves to die.
And, you know, we saw, look, the taped confession, this guy is no genius. He has trouble articulating a subject with a predicate in a single sentence. So,
I believe he dropped out of high school.
Yeah, I mean, this is not going to go well, right?
Not at all.
All right, one of the mitigating factors is remorse, yet in his confession, absolutely no remorse. What if he gets up in a closing argument and says, I'm really sorry for what I did. I'm terribly sorry for killing the people that you love so much?
Well, the thing is, Greg, the jurors are the same ones who decided his guilt. So they already heard the evidence. They saw the evidence that was presented by the prosecutor. So his credibility is already shot. And oftentimes when defendants get up on that trial and they'll say, you know what, I'm innocent, I didn't do it, and then that sentencing, you know, I'm sorry for what I did, it doesn't hold well with the jurors.
Aggravating factors would appear to outweigh any mitigating factors meriting death. They would be multiple killings, substantial planning, and acts which were heinous, atrocious, and cruel.
Right, and that's what you have here, absolutely.
All right. Keisha Hebben, good to see you.
Good to see you too, Greg. Thank you.
Mariah Carey wrapped up her 2016 with a bit of a rough New Year's Eve performance. Did you see it?
Well, Happy New Year!
So did she make it through that moment? Lots of critics say, no, not exactly. What was going on? A technical glitch, or as she claims, sabotage? Kennedy is here next. Folks in Los Angeles got a New Year's surprise after somebody changed the world-famous Hollywood sign to read, you got it, Hollyweed. As in, you know, hooch, cannabis, all those things. Cops say a man climbed up the mountain overnight, threw tarps over the last two O's to make them look like E's. They say it was a dangerous move. The guy could face trespassing charges. Apparently, it's not uncommon. Cops say somebody tried to vandalize the sign at least once a year, and some folks on social media speculated this prankster may have a political motive. Less than 2 months ago, Californians voted to legalize pot for recreational use. Maybe that has something to do with our next story. Nah. Mariah Carey apparently tried to end 2016 on a high note, get it, but had a hard time hitting them. She took the stage for New Year's Rockin' Eve draped in feathers. Okay, so far so good. 20 minutes to go until 2017. During her 1991 hit song Emotions, this happened.
Okay.
Oops. Mariah spent most of the rest of that song talking to the crowd about technical problems instead of singing. Her next song, We Belong Together, started better, but that may have been because she wasn't actually singing live. Watch this.
When you left, I lost a part of me. It's still so hard to believe. Come back, baby, please, 'cause we belong together. You just don't get any better.
Okay, don't touch the controls. It wasn't your TV set. When Mariah moves the mic down, her vocals keep playing, and then after that, she walks off the stage. Her reps say, Dick Clark Productions set her up to fail. The company denies that. Kennedy is here. Oh, God, you have your own little promo thing there.
I know, okay.
Host of Kennedy.
That's right.
Monday through Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern on Fox Business Network. It says for me to read that there.
I'm glad you did. Thank you, Greg Jarrett.
What happened?
I got a chance to look into Mariah Carey's eyes that night before she took the stage.
And?
I have to say there was a bit of a vacancy.
Like what was going on?
A whole lot of nothing. And I think that's the problem. And I don't know if Mariah had taken something for the nerves, but it really didn't help her stage presence and the execution of songs that she's been performing for decades. Now, we all know that Mariah has a reality show right now on E! called Mariah's World, and maybe bumbling through a performance would be a great way to get everyone talking about her, because more people are talking about Mariah Carey now than they would if she had had a flawless performance. We all would have gone, huh, that's wonderful. Mariah Carey still singing if she had just executed it properly. But the fact that she botched it, complained, and eventually walked off leaves our tongues wagging, like so many dogs in the pound, Greg Jarrett.
Dogs in the pound.
She says that she was sabotaged, and Dick Clark Productions says that's defamation. They're throwing around big words. The story has not gone
But they're just ginning up Mariah's World on Bravo, maybe, and where I saw a clip before our hour here, it took 4 people to put on her stilettos.
Only 4?
Only 4.
If it took 4 people to put on her stilettos, can you imagine how many people it took to put on that bodysuit?
Look how terrific she looks in that bodysuit.
Shoes on. She really does.
You know what she is? Kelsey, our producer, said she's a hot mess.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't know what that meant, so I looked it up in the Urban Dictionary.
Oh, Greg, never look things up in the Urban Dictionary.
A person in total disarray while still undeniably attractive. That is Mariah Carey.
That's well said, and I'm glad you used your reference material.
She looks fantastic. You know,
she does.
I do find her incredibly entertaining.
Indeed. There's a reason she's had this kind of staying power, Greg.
She's a terrific talent.
She has an incredible voice. Her dog has been used. Her dog.
Her dog has been used? Where did that come from?
Never mind. Her voice is it's world-renowned.
Yeah.
And with so many great singers who have fallen and passed before us, it's nice that we still have someone like Mariah Carey to look up to. If only we could have watched an actual performance on Saturday night.
But she's had a tough year, 2016.
Sure she has.
She broke up with her rich boyfriend.
James Packer, Australian billionaire.
And she wants a $50 million inconvenience
Which I
fee.
absolutely love this, and I hope he pays it. Because an inconvenience fee is so broad that you can really charge anyone for that. It doesn't matter if you leave a job or leave a relationship. If you can get a massive amount of money that you are not entitled to, it's going to change capitalism and democracy.
You know, I'm a lawyer, but I never knew there was such a thing as an inconvenience fee. I would have been rich and retired by now, having been inconvenienced on many occasions.
The altars you'd been left at?
Yeah.
But you know what? I worry about her ultimately because she is a mom and she's had troubles in the past. And do you remember when she went on TRL with a ice cream cart, and it preceded her visit
I don't
to
even know what
Trembling Hills.
TRL is.
Oh, Greg, it's okay, honey.
I have no idea.
Some of the young people back here know.
Yeah, they're giggling at me.
Yeah.
They're laughing. They're mocking. Kennedy with her own promo in a fuchsia dress.
Yes.
Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Greg. Happy New Year.
We'll be right back. Whoa, don't you hate it when that happens? Lots of screaming, people on a ferry watching somebody's car slide backwards into the water. Happened in Australia New Year's Eve. The group was headed out to an island to celebrate. The passenger who put this video online wrote that wallets and cell phones were inside the car. Fortunately, no person was in the car. According to local media, the car sank within minutes, which, yeah, kind of looks like that. The ferry company reports it's investigating what went wrong. You think? Folks across the country watching and waiting for a second baby eagle to break out of its shell. The first of 2 eggs hatched this weekend at Fort Myers, Florida. Folks watching it live on the Eagle Cam. The camera owner says 60 million folks were tuning into the feed. Today, we got a little glimpse of the chick moving around its nest. No cracked egg on the second one. I'm Greg in for Shep. Your World is next.
Will the new year bring all Americans a new